off and running, everyone. Thanks for your patience, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jess. I am with the Beyond Coal campaign of the Sierra Club here in Wisconsin. I'm an organizer, and I live in Madison. I'm also a member of the Clean Power Coalition of Southeast Wisconsin. And I just want to thank everyone for spending their afternoon with us today here on a Sunday for a really important topic. You should be in the right place here. We're going to be talking about just transition, supporting workforce and communities from coal to clean energy. And it would be great if folks want to just tap on the chat box and introduce yourselves to each other, to us, say who you are and where you're from and why this topic is important to you. I think it would be great to just check in and say a quick hello that way. For those who are looking for how to reach the chat box, here's a little bit of a primer before we begin today. We ask that you keep yourselves on mute during presentations, so just to eliminate background noise. We are also recording today, so so you can share this later afterwards, so it will be a great resource ongoing. And so to mute yourself and unmute, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so we will want to hear from you, certainly. There is the icon in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom interface, and you can just tap that to mute or unmute. If you would like to hide your video from the rest of us or share it, there's the icon for that says Start Video. And then lastly, over towards the right is going to be that chat icon so that you can open up the chat text box and share ideas, questions, concerns. If you're having any technical issues, feel free to chat in there and someone will be able to help you as well. And like I said, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any burning questions throughout the presentations, we will we'll be tracking those in the chat and come back to those as well. So yeah, so here we are. Thank you. Welcome. I want to just kind of size up the topic before we get started. Thinking about just transition for today, I think it's good to reflect on how we got here in thinking and caring about an array of impacts of a transition from coal to clean energy. Across the country, coal-fired power plants are closing at a rapid rate due to a variety of factors, not only because they're bad for the environment, for the climate, and our health, which we've known for a long time and we made a lot of noise about so far and continue to do so, but also because they're simply bad business. As we know, in today's capitalist society and the human condition of today, in 2020, economics push people in power to make big moves. Today, clean energy sources like wind and solar are cost competitive and overtaking the fossil fuel market. Coal-fueled power plants are a wasteful option at this point. Additionally, influential investors are moving away from fossil fuels like we've never seen before. So our investor-owned utilities are feeling the squeeze from that angle as well. We also have data that shows us that there's a preference by US Americans for clean energy over coal that spans the political spectrum. Meanwhile, state and local governments are setting ambitious climate goals with major implications on big polluters like coal plants. So regulations will only continue to tighten and on near future timelines. Calls for racial and economic justice are uniting and strengthening communities in rallying against exploitative industrial polluters. And the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic and the failures of our interwoven systems are serving up a cultural reckoning wherein we have an opportunity to imagine and build a just society anew. Taking into holistic account public health, climate science, historically disenfranchised perspectives and voices, and ways of restructuring power and more. All of this means that this wave of coal plant shutdowns will absolutely continue. But what does that mean for local communities and individuals economically reliant on these institutions that have been present for years and decades? For each coal plant retirement, there's job loss to think about, training needs of workers, there's a tax base that will be impacted, there's a multi-acre site needing cleanup and redevelopment, and more. So let's talk about that today. So the Beyond Coal campaign, as I said, I'm an organizer here in Wisconsin. The campaign is a group of folks, individuals, organizations that all want to see every coal burning power plant in the US closed and replaced entirely with sources of clean energy. The goals of the campaign are to see 100% clean energy by 2050 and all coal offline by the year 2030. This is where we're at today. You can always hop over to the Beyond Coal website to check today's numbers. Right now, we are at the point of seeing 324 coal plants retired or announced for retirement with dates and timelines. That's well over halfway to our goal of all coal plants. There are remaining 206 plants throughout the United States that have not been announced for retirement yet. So we're part of something very big. There are a lot of reasons that we want to see this, right? Just a real brief snapshot, high level. One aspect is really like the health impact. So retiring one dirty coal-fueled power plant will prevent 25 premature deaths, 38 heart attacks, 408 asthma attacks, and 23 asthma-related emergency room visits. This is where we're at today in Wisconsin. So these are current coal plants throughout the state. There are 8 remaining. You'll see that there are a couple that are circled there. Those have retirement announcements and short-term plans for retirement, both, one by the end of 2021, one by the end of 2022. So the Genoa Generating Station is on the Mississippi River on the west side of the state, and that was announced for retirement back in January by Dairyland Power Cooperative. And then the Edgewater Generating Station on Lake Michigan in Sheboygan on the east side of the state was announced in May for retirement by Alliant Energy. So you'll also see in southeastern Wisconsin, there is, between Milwaukee and Chicago, there are a pair of coal plants that are really on the same campus, under the same ownership. And they're the Elm Road Generating Station and the Oak Creek Power Plant. The Elm Road Generating Station is the newest coal plant in Wisconsin, and it was completed in 2011. The Oak Creek Power Plant was completed in the 50s. So they're treated as separate plants, but they're basically at the same facility. So to give a little snapshot of a perspective around the newest plant there, Elm Road, the chairman of We Energies, the owner of that plant, has stated that they plan to burn coal at that plant through mid-century. So that equates to 1,200 or so megawatts into and beyond the year 2050, according to him. So the full statewide capacity is 5,300 megawatts among the 8, 745 of that, as I said, has set retirement in the near future in the next couple of years. And again, 6 remaining plants we don't have timelines for. So something with this to think about is that, the more time that we have to plan and prepare and think about, to know the timeline for these plants, given the inevitability of retirements, it helps us really more holistically take into account and work together on a just transition in the communities. When the Edgewater Generating Station was announced for retirement in May, Wisconsin Public Radio put out an announcement, a piece about it, and I just wanted to share this blurb and read it directly to y'all about, just to I think it highlights a lot of things that we want to think about. So it says, Alliant announced last fall its plans to generate up to 1,000 megawatts of solar by the end of 2023, which would power about 260,000 homes. The company said the decision to shutter the plant was part of a year-long process and the next phase in transitioning to renewable energy. Alliant has around 3,600 employees, and about 80 workers will be impacted by the closure. About 40% of employees are eligible for retirement, and the company plans to provide career assistance to employees, including tuition reimbursement and resume writing. So I think just kind of that piece, it's not to hold this up as a pinnacle of transition planning or just transition, but it is just something to kind of to check in, to note the various points that are made. So they point out that they have been working to make this decision for a year. It's been a year-long process. They point to their plans to generate solar projects they have coming up, and note that the decision to retire the plant was part of their next phase in transitioning to renewable energy. 80 workers will be impacted. 40% will be eligible for career retirement from their jobs, and that the company is looking at providing career assistance to employees. So those are a few pieces to think about as we think about a transition. This just shows us a decline, a pretty sharp decline in the past several years in coal consumption in the U.S. This is from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So this is data that goes through 2018, but we can see going back to the 50s, there was definitely an increase in coal consumption and coal use in our nation. And around 2008, 2009, maybe we started to see a decline, and it's a pretty sharp, significant decline. And as you can see, the top line, it's expected at that point, 2018 was expected to be the lowest point in 39 years. So moving into clean energy, for our state, you can always reference Renew Wisconsin's website to take a look at this, this evolving data. These are new projects that are slated right now. This is as of April 2020, so you can take a look at what's coming online for solar, wind, and battery storage. So let's see, the yellow circles are solar. Wind, I think it's blocked on my computer right now with Zoom features, but the wind, I think, is the blue triangles, and then the squares are storage. So we've got 5,755 megawatts of solar coming up. So this is encouraging. It's encouraging to check back on this and see what's happening and what's moving, what our landscape is looking like. Also to note, by 2025, according to Energy Innovation Analysis in March 2019, almost every existing coal plant in the United States will cost more to operate than building replacement wind and solar within 35 miles of each plant. That's our good news slide, one of them. So this is from a nationwide perspective, these numbers. As of March 2019, nationwide clean jobs outnumbered fossil fuel jobs nearly 3 to 1. So some of the top types of jobs within the industry, number one is energy efficiency, then renewable energy, solar, wind, and so on. And a wind, in terms of job growth, wind technician and solar installer are projected to be the number 1 and number 3 fastest growing jobs through 2026, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. They were number 1 and number 2, and I think this was just recently updated this month, actually. And nurse practitioner is in the number 2 spot. That, which also makes sense. So as we look at Wisconsin, there are over 76,600 clean energy jobs. It's important to note that as we just think about this and discuss this, that was pre-pandemic. Like many sectors, clean energy jobs there's been epic amounts of unemployment in recent months because of the pandemic. And so that's a whole area to hypothesize around and watch and see us hopefully get back to where we were when we can. In 2019, there were 356 jobs, 356 new jobs in Wisconsin in clean energy. And clean energy jobs grew 1.5% faster. Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. Than the state's overall employment. So that's just a little bit of background that I wanted to share before we really dig in. We have a really incredible speaker with us today, really awesome resource. We have Larry Williams Jr. from the Sierra Club's Labor and Economic Justice Program to speak with us about a lot of various aspects that I'm excited to cover today. We will definitely have time for Q&A as well, but I want to just, thank you, Larry, for being here. If you want to hop in, steal the screen away from me, that would be great. And I'll let you just, if you don't mind sharing more about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure. With those amazing compliments, I really have to do great here. So the bar is set high. um, how do I take the active speaker role? Is the camera on me?
I think that it will be, is it if you share your screen?
Okay, I will do that.
Or do you not need to share your
Not
screen?
at the moment, not yet.
Okay.
But
there, I got you.
Okay, there we
Thank
go.
you.
Nice, nice. Sorry, Zoom, right? We should. I feel like I should know Zoom by now. Really, really excited to talk to you all today. You could totally be watching the Packers right now, or like, maybe a second round of church or something, but you decided to spend this afternoon with us. So really excited about that. So thank you. I think what a great intro in terms of thinking about what the numbers look like in terms of jobs, in terms of what the opportunity is for us. Contextually, we're 3 weeks, a little more before the election, which is crazy. I myself am trying to unplug from it as much as possible, send the ballot in, and just wash my hands of it because of the intensity of this thing. But the thing that never goes away, regardless of where we are in the political season, is that, people are struggling, economically. And I think that the pandemic has, if you listen to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they said this very accurately. It's just really revealed a lot of the inequities. Even people like them who predicted that a pandemic could happen did not predict the level of inequality that will come about. What I mean by that is people who are in frontline jobs, bus drivers, flight attendants, people who have to interact with people on a daily basis are really at risk for catching coronavirus. And if we really look around, the majority of those folks in many states happens to be Black and brown folks. And so the folks who are already suffering from pre-existing conditions, and yes, the impacts of environmental inequities and environmental justice issues. How does that relate? How's that relevant? I know some folks may have been saying things like, we're a majority white community. How does this relate to us? That's a good question. The reality is, like, in this country, we only look at history in a singular fashion sometimes. So we don't necessarily think about why our community looks the way it looks. Why is this street all Black? Why is the street all Latino? How did these things come to be? Obviously, that's a much longer conversation. We'll touch on some of the historical things that have led to the situation we're in right now. But the main topic of our conversation today is just transition. And I want to begin by just giving a little intro, a brief history on just transition and the concept, what it encompasses, what are its historical successes and evolution. I don't know if I could touch on all that, but hopefully this is interesting to you. We have plenty of time to talk, ask questions, debate, or whatever, but I think I want to give you a primer. And I have a presentation to go with this as well. So the phrase just transition came from, and this is from research done by the Labor Network for Sustainability, from a gentleman who was in the oil, atomic, and chemical workers. And the idea was that he was in an industry, the nuclear industry, that was unsafe for his community, unsafe for his coworkers. And he decided that he wanted them to be able to change industries, but to be able to do so in a way that protected their economic livelihood. So a lot of people are usually really surprised to hear that because, they wouldn't think a union would necessarily be in support of shutting something down when usually they're focused on jobs. But obviously, I think we all know that the labor movement is more than just a monolith. There are more than 20,000 local and international unions in the United States alone. And when we're talking about the Sierra Club perspective, the ones that we tend to work with or be at odds with are kind of in the same field. We're talking about, plumbers and pipe fitters, utility workers, specifically IBEW, UAW. These are the unions where people are using their hands, they're working in those dirty industries. And you'd be surprised to know that a lot of those folks, they understand the impact that dirty industries can have on their family, because maybe they lost a loved one, a wife, a husband who worked in that industry. So I think the main thing, if you come away with anything in this conversation, is that I hope that you realize that there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate with the labor movement. And also that the labor movement isn't one thing either, that it is structured organizations of unions, but it's also workers who individually are pushing for change in their community and looking at this as a workplace safety or community or environmental justice challenge. So that's just a basic intro to the term just transition. The idea that we want to move away from, the type of jobs that destroy our planet, but we want to protect the livelihood of the people who are in those jobs. Another thing I want to note, something that I had a big realization about this week actually, is that Sierra Club is active in a number of ways in just transition. And I didn't realize myself how many I've actually been touching at one time. And that's led to a lot of confusion. So I'm really working now to try to clarify this for people. So for one example, we are responsible for shutdowns, right? We are actively working to shut down, DTE in Michigan, different organizations that are polluting. In that particular instance, it's easy to say we maybe have some responsibility. Maybe we should be thinking about, those workers that work in those plants and what happens to them after. Should they be getting retrained? Should they be getting other opportunities to work in clean energy? What can we do to support these workers, since we're saying there should be an end to this industry or an end to this particular work? What can we do to support them? Another example is when a utility decides to retire itself. In that, you could argue that maybe we have a little bit less responsibility, but we still have some power because we have communication with the utility leadership, and that we have an opportunity to sway them to either move those workers or do something to fund their retirements, etc. And then there's the philosophical space where we're talking about just transition as a country. Donald Trump said that he wanted to fund $1 trillion of infrastructure. He never did that. So that leaves an opening for Joe Biden to say, this is something that we're going to do for the Rust Belt states, for the swing states, is we're going to put $1 trillion of investment into, rebuilding our bridges, our roads, these really basic things that actually will create a lot of work and a lot of opportunity. So the transition from coal to clean energy, from dirty fuels to clean energy, I really want folks to think really creatively in terms of your community and think about, what does your community want? What do they want to see? Not what does Sierra Club want, but what does the community want to see, and what are the possibilities that could be accomplished using the pandemic and the economic, pitfalls that we've had in this country for so long as not just a challenge, but an opportunity to recreate the reality that we exist in, recreate the society that we live in. So that's my intro. I'm going to go ahead and pivot to a presentation here, if I can share my screen. All right. Okay. So we covered a little bit of just transition. We kind of identified what exactly it is. And can you all see my screen? I'm going to hope that's a yes.
Yes.
That's a yes.
Okay, great. So this is a Prezi. So let's talk a little bit more about just transition. This is something that has different meanings to different people. I identified for you what it meant for the oil, atomic, and chemical workers, but realistically, Sierra Club is only one slice of the environmental movement. Different ends of the progressive movement are faced with different challenges and concerns. So for environmental groups, we say things like workers should not be bearing the burden of the environmental costs. Environmental justice communities are already paying with their health, and then they lose their jobs. Just transition ensures a humane and civilized approach. That's Aaron Mayer, former Sierra Club president. And I think that's one of the more evolved versions of our perspective of just transition. But we've also had some that are only focused on the transition to clean energy and not necessarily on workers. So that's one perspective. Enduring power structures of sovereignty, capitalism, scientism, patriarchy, and even modernity generate and perpetuate the environmental crisis while consolidating structural inequalities between global North and global South. So that's taking the global perspective and realizing that there's a lot of things that play in here and a lot of challenges that we have to face if we're going to get at the root of the problem. And the third thing I'm going to point out here is that the Sierra Club started the Blue Green Alliance in 2006. And I've listed some of the specific organizations that are part of the BGA. So we have the Steelworkers, we have SMART, we have NRDC, the Teachers Union, utility workers, UAW, electrical workers, and the CWA and the Labor Network for Sustainability. The idea is understanding that, you know, to have a true coalition of labor and environmental work that's done, it's very challenging. And so the BGA was started to create a place of basically conflict resolution. And they're based in Minnesota, but they're almost all over the country. I'm going to read you a quote from BGA. BGA's core belief is that just transition is not just about giving people money. Just transition needs to mean there's direct help to people who lose their jobs along with the economic development plan. I think that's a really great definition that outlines some of the things that I've been expressing. And then unions. What do specifically unions think about the phrase just transition? Workers who have had well-paying jobs have seen big changes in the working class and feel it's gotten the short end of the stick. Holding on to fossil fuel jobs is seen as the only way to maintain a decent life for them and their families. They've seen when their friends and family lose their jobs, life is hard. Working people are afraid of change that involves job loss. Now, that's not every single worker, that's not every single union, but that is a common refrain that we hear. People are afraid to lose their job, and that, you know, we often will come into the conversation as environmental folks and we do it in a way that's saying, hey, you know, why won't you just let us shut this plant down, because we're going to create more jobs. Like, the one thing we definitely don't want to do is make a bunch of promises that we can't necessarily for sure keep, right? And also just to be looking at the rosy picture and not realizing that when that shutdown happens, some people may actually be losing their job and may not be able to replace it. We have to accept that reality. But once we accept that reality, we also can begin to be realistic and say, what can we do? And that's what the rest of this presentation is about. So I wanted to just acknowledge some of the original trailblazers of the environmental justice movement. And I also want to just say that, you know, the work that we're building on now as an organization, there's always been someone before us that's done it, and it has been less well funded to do it. So as challenging as the things that we're facing, there are people like Hazel Johnson, Dr. Bullard, Peggy Shepard, and Tom Goldtooth, who all in their own way have been fighting against their local and community challenges when it comes to environmental justice. And I encourage you, if you don't know these folks, if you don't know their story, please check them out, because it's really helpful to understand that, you know, especially the folks of color who are not traditionally celebrated. We always hear about, you know, John Muir, but, you know, do we know about the folks who have been fighting in the last 100 years in their community for some of the same things that we are? I also wanted to point out that Executive Order 12898 was the first executive order for environmental justice that was signed by Bill Clinton, February 11th, 1994. Something worth looking up. A lot of people don't know about this. You may ask yourself, why is he pivoting to environmental justice if we're talking about just transition? Well, these things are not separate, right? You can't have a transition to clean energy that saves the environment without considering the economic pieces, and vice versa. You can't have a transition economically without understanding that you have to be looking out for the environmental impacts. And that's why we've gotten into the place that we are now. We're always concerned simply with growth and not necessarily with the impact on the community and the impact on people. So we can share the same space with people from the EJ community and from the union movement and other activist communities, and think about being more transformative as opposed to making transactions. Okay, so I put these slides in because I know there's always kind of left brain, right brain folks on these conversations. Um, so these charts are representing a couple things. Number one, the correlation between the increase in wealth by the top 1%, as well as the coordination between the decline in union membership, as well as the decline in real wages, and the decline in manufacturing in the United States. So if you look at the first slide here on the upper left-hand corner, the blue, this is not a very good slide. I apologize. Some of these are a little bit old and they're also not very good looking, but you're going to get the point, trust me. So if you look at this light blue line here, right, this line represents union membership in the public sector over the last, I don't know, 60 years, 80 years, whatever, right? And for a while, that was actually pretty, you know, it was going up really high in the 1960s, reached its peak in the mid 1970s, and it's been pretty consistent since then, right? That's why the union membership of public sector unions has been under attack by the right. You may have seen that there's been Supreme Court cases like the Janus case, et cetera, and ever since a Supreme Court justice wrote a letter to corporations in the 1950s saying that we needed to basically attack the labor movement because the pro-union movement was present in every sector of our life. There was a coordinated effort in universities, you know, in the workplace to remove the kind of working class consciousness that exists and that is supportive of the labor movement. Now, even though it wasn't successful in the public sector, it has been successful in the private sector. So the dotted line, purple dotted line, is the combination of the two, but the black line is the private sector. So there's been a steady decline in union membership in the private sector since about the 1970s. And a lot happened there. Deregulation of the trucking industry and more happened there. The firing of the air traffic controllers. There's a lot that happened in this period here where you have that inflection point. If you look at the second slide to the right on the top, the income going to the top 1%, you know, even though this graph stops in 2008, this can go all the way out to 2020, and I guarantee you these trends will continue. The red line represents the share of wealth going to the top 10%. And, you know, now that would be somewhere up here or off the page, right? The blue line represents union membership. And again, you see that decline going through 2008, and it's become a little bit stable in the last 5 years, but still there's not a huge increase in union membership, though public opinion has changed and is going towards union membership. Understanding that people who are in unions make more over a lifetime being members of unions than people who are not. They typically have health insurance and types of benefits that engender longevity. If you look at this slide here on the bottom left-hand corner, obviously manufacturing in the United States has declined steadily as well since the 1960s and 70s as well. A lot of those jobs have been shipped overseas. Lastly, and most interestingly probably, is that real wages have been stagnant, you know, over the course of this period, but productivity has increased. So nobody can say U.S. workers are doing less work. I think we can all agree that we're working more hours, but we're getting less money for that work, okay? So where did the problem start? I should have said a trigger warning before this slide, apologies. There's a picture of a slave here, right? The idea is to understand that, you know, this is an economy that was originally built on exploitation. The gathering of cotton by slaves, by African-American slaves in the United States is not unique to the United States. Of course, across the Caribbean and Latin America, slavery was very common, sugar, cotton, all these industries. But we have an economy that was always based off exploitation, and it's never completely gone away. It's just changed form. It's just evolved, right? So if we're talking about just transition, you can't have this conversation without admitting that a certain sector of the population has never really been part of this economy, not fully. Black workers, Latino workers, immigrants who work in the fields, those folks are the people who have consistently been cheated and will continue to be cheated if we don't intentionally change the way our economy works as we transition to a clean energy economy. I always love having this slide in. When I used to talk about this slide before the election of Donald Trump, folks couldn't really envision what I was talking about. Some of you may know that right after slavery was ended, we had something called Reconstruction. The idea was that Black folks would take part in government and be full members of society, but that never happened. As you can see on the left here, there were a lot of Black senators right after slavery, but there was what we call a white lash. January 1st, 1863 to March 31st, 1877, the Reconstruction period, there was a lot of anger that came about because of the movement of Black folks from slavery to freedom. I would argue that the election of Donald Trump is reflective of that anger as well, seeing the election of President Barack Obama and the economic plight reached by a lot of white folks in the Midwest and in the South. We're seeing a lot of that now, a lot of that anger. Also relevant to that, this is a slide showing stocks as they slid. Let me just read this to you first. Prison stocks slid again Tuesday, extending Monday's declines after the federal government said it will examine the use of privately managed immigration detention facilities. That was August 30th, 2016. Shares in two of the largest private prison stocks jumped sharply the morning Donald Trump was elected president. The Corrections Corporation of America surged by 60% before falling back to 34%. So this is a direct correlation between the fact that if we have more full prisons, we see that private prisons are able to, make more money. They're more profitable because they have beds that are full. Understanding that and understanding how we play a part in this economy, and how we can move away from an exploitative economy by being very intentional about the work that we create as an environmental organization and supporting those things is very important, very key. Oops. All right. So people often will reach out to the labor program and say, hey, is this company a good company or a bad company? Well, rather than saying good company, bad company, we like to talk about principles. Does this company fit the principles that are aligned with our vision? A long time ago, Sierra Club came up with some principles. I'm gonna read through them really quickly. Quality careers for all people employed in clean energy industries, just transition that protects the livelihood and well-being of fossil fuel workers and communities, equitable access to clean energy related economic opportunities, including careers, wealth, and clean energy infrastructure for vulnerable communities and individuals, including people of color, working class, low-income people, women, and youth. Affordable clean energy, especially for members of vulnerable communities. Democratic accountability, ensuring the clean energy industry operates within a democratic system of safeguards and transparency in the public interest. I would argue that those are pretty high level, but pretty accurate. Where I think that aligns in a way that aligns with Sierra Club's values. It's important also that we put a photo here that is of a woman making something in prison. She's in prison, but she's doing work, which there's we all know about the 13th Amendment says that you cannot be forced to do labor unless you are found guilty of a crime. So there's a huge loophole in how this economy is set up. And I would argue that if we do not make sure that these solar jobs, these construction jobs, these clean energy jobs that are created in general, if they're not union jobs, if they're not high-road jobs, well-paying jobs, union jobs, then they're going to be the lowest common denominator. And you guessed it, the lowest common denominator is prison labor. And in fact, one of our researchers a couple of years ago found out that there is a solar company, I won't name that company, but that actually has some of its solar panels made in prison. So obviously that's not always the case, but there is a possibility for those types of things happening more often. All right, so how do we accomplish this? I'm just going to give you some examples of how to think about the policy. We could talk about this all day, but there's some truisms here. The challenge is not just creating jobs, it's creating quality jobs, right? So securing a just transition depends on the incorporation of high road job standards to ensure green jobs are good jobs. So I'm just going to take a second and give you an example that's really close to home. The Progressive Workers Union at Sierra Club, of which I'm former president, when we first started trying to organize for our last contract, we recognized that a lot of the folks at Sierra Club were not making the type of money it would take to be able to stay at Sierra Club for a long time. We looked at the amount of time people were staying at Sierra Club, and we realized people will come in, they're coming really young, and they leave after a couple of years because they've worked really, really hard, many, many hours, and they got a lot of experience, and they're really well regarded in the community of environmental organizations, but they're severely underpaid. And so one of the things we fought for was family sustaining wages according to the MIT wage calculator. And, I'll admit, after fighting a lot, Sierra Club stepped up, and, I can't speak for the chapter contract that was recently signed, but I know at the national level, everybody makes family sustaining wages. And so, for me to be able to hear people say things like, I can now afford to stay at this job, or I can stay in my apartment, or I can buy a bike. Those things are important. It's not just about getting in the job. It's about getting a job where you can have a livelihood and build a family, no matter what the definition of family is to you. What does this look like? This looks like, understanding that a lot of the people who typically get jobs can come from a certain community, that's racially, that's gender-wise. So a lot of times it's difficult to target people based on one particular category. So what we can do is we can target and local hire, and we create provisions for vulnerable communities and say we want equal opportunity, inclusiveness. You can look at the numbers and you can figure this out. A lot of these things are public data. Where is the most unemployment at? Where are these hires happening? Where are they not happening? You can require that a certain percentage of projects be workers from a certain zip code with a median income of a certain percentage of the federal poverty line. You can do what's called a pre-apprenticeship. A lot of times, just like we have voting inequities where, people are required to have a driver's license or, drive across the state to try to drop off their ballot. Same thing with the job, and this exists both in the labor movement and the environmental movement. Sometimes a training facility for a union might be out in the suburbs, but the jobs that, the people who need the jobs are in the city. That's inequality. There should be equal access for those folks, regardless of where they live and who they are. So a pre-apprenticeship can do something where you prepare people, even if there's like societal problems like, drug abuse, substance abuse, things that impact everybody in this country. A pre-apprenticeship can get people ready with robust skill certification programs. And one example is the Cypress Mandela Training Facility in California, where they bring in young men and women from across the country. And, I'm talking about, 8-hour trainings. They do applied math skills. They really, really teach them the trade inside and out. They basically have them build inside of this guy's warehouse an entire house, the electric work, everything, the retrofitting, everything. And then they completely deconstruct the house. So they become some of the most skilled people in their area. And when the contractor is looking for staff, this training facility sends people blindly, so they don't have the chance to discriminate. They only know that they're getting workers from Cypress Mandela, which provides really, really awesome work, right? So when they show up and they're Black, they're Latino, they're female, doesn't matter. We know we got somebody that's going to do the work. Prevailing wage. There's a lot of history behind this and a lot of law established about, the type of wages people should be paid for state-funded projects. And, getting a union involved in this is really critical because they have a lot of experience in how to both train workers for apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships, but also how to make sure that those projects have prevailing wages. And then there's project labor agreements and community benefits agreements. The idea here is that there's a certain standard that workers should be working under if they are working on a state-funded or federal project. And the community should have a voice in what that project looks like. What do they want built? What do they want it at? What should the wages be? These are all things that can be negotiated, and Sierra Club has a lot of power to support getting the right people at the table to make these things happen. And then lastly, again, I just want to reiterate, if you can, because it's not always possible, but it's important if you're participating in the shutdown to engage the union, find out how many of those workers are union, who represents them, are they making family sustaining wages? And if so, how can we support them getting another opportunity if they're losing one? I feel like I've been talking a lot here, so we're going to wrap up soon. I wanted to showcase a little bit of the conversations that we've been having over the years. One example of a meeting we did was with the steelworkers, utility workers, and what we call the Just Transition Committee, in zip code 48217, one of the most polluted zip codes in the country in Michigan. Rhonda Anderson, who has the pink pants in this picture, is really amazing activist. If you don't know Rhonda, send her a note, get to know her. And there's several folks in Sierra Club in the photo you might be able to spot: Teresa, Regina, a few folks. And then on the right, we have Jason Walsh, who was with the White House at the time, who's now head of the Blue Green Alliance. The idea was to bring together community activists, the Just Transition community, who we supported, with local mayors and with the unions, and have a conversation, get some funding, some federal funding for transition, and think about communities that have been historically overlooked and discriminated against. And the money went to create a report. There were, of course, along the way, there's always hiccups, there's always issues, but the point is that you want to be the facilitator, trying to make sure you get the right people at the table to be a part of the conversation, to think about transition. And it's not just you have everybody in the room who's supposed to be in the room. This is a conversation that we had in New Orleans a few years back, and I'm just going to read the folks here. So from left to right, we have Reuven Albert from the United Homer Nation, commercial fisherman; Peter Tapanier from Unite Here; Tanya Harpo and Laura Akua from 5 for 15, and a gentleman, Randall Carroll, from the United Association of Gulf Coast District Council of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. The reason this is so important is because you have a union like Unite Here that represents hotel workers, but they understand that clean energy is really important for their workers, and that they have a lot of power to retrofit hotels as a union representing hotel workers. To have the United Homer Nation gentlemen, who their union is losing a lot of their land because of the encroaching of water and the storms that are happening. And so for them, he specifically said, there's no such thing as just transition for us, because this is our way of life. The question was, what is just transition to you, right? And the two young ladies from 5 for 15, they were saying, look, like, for us, we make $15. We don't even make $15 an hour, so we can't even think about what the future looks like. So we're just trying to make sure that we are able to get our daily life stable. And then the gentleman from the plumbers and pipe fitters, he has these workers who, they're anxious to learn, they're anxious to do work, but they're also anxious about what this could mean for their work and what it means for their future. So if you think about those different perspectives in the room, it's a completely different conversation if it was just Sierra Club or just us in one union. But this is the type of coalition that you want to be building. So this is what the larger group looked like. You had lots of different folks from the community involved in that conversation. And just to show a little bit more of that collaboration, we've done collaborations across the country as Sierra Club. So don't let anybody tell you we don't support unions. This is the People's Climate March before my time, but those are all Teamster members who were out there supporting the Climate March. We had a whole bunch of, Sierra Club folks supporting Verizon workers who were on the picket line. They ended up winning their contract. These are all Sierra Club folks. And, our Walmart, we supported, the women who have been organizing there for paternity rights and had lots of victories. So, the bottom line here, it takes collaboration to win. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to share with you for today. So now I want to share my email. If anybody has more questions and wants to talk about this policy of just transition, what it could look like for you, think of me as a starting point. There's lots of folks who are engaged in just transition, both from a policy perspective and or doing shutdowns, thinking about the workers. There's people in California like Monica Embry, people like Lisa Dix in New York who've had a lot of success working with unions directly. There's folks in Maryland who've been writing local legislation, state policy on this stuff. But the idea is you have to figure out what your challenges are and what you want to accomplish, and we can go from there. And that's all I have. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you so much, Jess.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Yeah, I really appreciate how you set us up for this discussion, and And so we do have a lot of questions. One, we'll start with a super easy question. Yes or no? Are you able to share a copy of your presentation with us, the slides after the webinar? Would you mind that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I will do that
Okay.
immediately after.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see, one question was, how do we proactively have these conversations if the utilities won't admit that coal plant shutdowns are likely?
Gotcha. You know, that's a really good question. I think that this is part of the reason why we always say to try to do an analysis of what the workforce looks like for yourself. Is there a union representing any of the workers at the utility? If not, you know, well, I guess even before that, you know, how many workers are actually working there? And then if they are union, which union is it? Because that actually allows you to have a very honest conversation with the union about what their concerns are before you even run to them and say, we're trying to shut this down. You know, it's like, honestly, you know, what is your situation there? What is your relationship with the utility? Do you have a sense of if there's anything happening? Because a lot of times you'd be surprised that they want to know just as much as you do, right? And sometimes you're able to actually have a back channel conversation and create a plan to think about helping the workers before the utility even admits that it's happening. And then that way you can go to them as a united front and present a plan, as opposed to just being Sierra Club and saying this is what we should do. You never want to be left out there like that and look like you're speaking for the workers. So I think, as usual, I always would say talk to whoever the worker representative is, and if you can't, then try to do as much research as you can and really try to come up with at least an initial plan of what you want to do.
Thanks, Larry. If anyone would like to elaborate as I read your question or respond, feel free to unmute yourself. If anyone wants to add anything to that.
I did see a question from Kathy. How do wages and benefits compare in clean energy jobs versus fossil fuel jobs? So, you know, that is you know, to answer that as a generalization, I would say that fossil fuel jobs typically pay way more. But the research shows that that's not always true, and that when you're talking about unionized clean energy jobs, then it becomes a little bit more equal. So there has been research that's been done. I'll see if I can gather some of that together and share that with you, Jess, to share with folks as well. But it depends on the state we're talking about. You know, is the work union labor? You know, is there an agreement between the clean energy companies to have to pay a certain wage because of prevailing labor agreements? Is there community benefits agreements? All those things play into whether or not those workers are going to be getting paid well, or if they're going to be low wage workers.
Okay, thank you. Let's see then. Question is, who's going to finance all these new green jobs? They tie into that.
That's a great question. In Illinois, the Illinois chapter worked really hard to pass something called the Illinois Clean Jobs Act. And this is the philosophical, remember when I gave the categories of different types of transition or different instances where we deal with transition. This is one of those instances where, you know, if we're envisioning a different future, then figuring out where the money comes from should be a part of that envisioning exercise. So, you know, you can, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a Democratic governor or a legislature that, you know, even a Republican legislature, I guess, but one that's willing to think about how to spend money, then you should be, as a line item in that conversation, be trying to figure out how to fund that work, to fund that new job that's created. So in the Illinois Clean Energy Clean Jobs program, what they did was they figured out, oh, pardon me, Elizabeth actually corrected me because I'm like stumbling here. Future Energy Jobs Act. And now they're working on the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Thank you, Elizabeth. One thing I want to note that they did was that, and they did this really well, they brought together clean energy partners, unions, faith groups, and of course the Sierra Club. And having all those folks together in one place, it makes the conversation a lot more powerful. And when you approach the state or whatever government organizations you're approaching, it's really difficult for them to ignore all of these folks together in the room. And I'm sorry, also environmental justice groups were involved in that conversation as well. And Elizabeth, if you want to add anything to that, please do. Not to put you on the spot.
Nope, I'm in my bathrobe watching on mute. So I'm just gonna watch. You're doing good.
No problem. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, a question about how much real gain for the strength of unions can ever be achieved until Taft-Hartley is repealed?
It's a good question. No, for those who don't know, Taft-Hartley was passed in 1947. It's a very strong anti-union bill. The main problems with Taft-Hartley is it makes it very difficult to organize. It makes it really easy for employers to intimidate workers, when they're trying to organize. I think the labor movement has been in a steady decline since 1947 for that reason. But the inflection of this history, we have to go back just a little bit, and pardon me for going back too far, but 1935, you have the Wagner Act, which made it legal for workers to organize. And this was something that was passed with the idea that if workers didn't have some sort of relief mechanism to be able to organize, then you were going to continue to have these labor conflicts in the street. So like I said earlier, whenever you have progress, you're going to have backlash. So 1947 was direct employer response to try to push back against 1935. Even later, 1959, you had the Landry-Griffin Act, which was an effort to restrict the ability of unions to be politically active and where they could be politically active. And so Janus, the Supreme Court ruling against that limited the right of public sector unions and fair share dues and all of that stuff. This is a continued legacy over 100 years of anti-worker policy. So, still unions exist no matter what, even though they always say unions are gonna end, they can't exist anymore. Yeah, they've been weakened in some places, but they're also stronger in some places. So I think as long as we have working people, we're probably gonna have unions, but they might be in some different form. I think repealing Taft-Hartley would be amazing, but there was an effort by the Obama administration to pass legislation that was pro-worker. I can tell you that Biden, I think, is not only pro-union, but he comes from the Rust Belt, and so there's a real opportunity for him to the labor movement thinks there's going to be a resurgence in pro-labor legislation with Joe Biden. I don't know if it will be, because like Obama was so focused on on healthcare, it was difficult for him to do anything for unions. So I'll say question mark. I don't know. But I do think that, unions in some industries are still making gains. You just won't hear about it on TV.
Sorry. Let's see. There's some curiosity about the solar company that you left unnamed. If you want to share any more about that, or why you don't want to name that, that question came up.
Well, I had this really amazing intern named Tom, like 3 years ago, and he saw some threads and he pulled on them, and he did the research and found out what that company was about, and that they were doing that. The only reason I don't want to name it is because, if we're going to post this conversation publicly, I don't want Sierra Club to get sued because of, an off-the-cuff comment that I made. But like, if somebody's interested in seeing that research and taking it further, I'd be happy to work with them on that, for sure.
Okay, thanks. Earlier, I had mentioned, I kind of shared that blurb about the retirement announcement from the company in Wisconsin, Alliant Energy. It mentioned career assistance. So someone commented that sounds pretty meager, given that the jobs lost are probably good union jobs. So, I mean, that's a comment, but if there's anything that you want, that inspires conversation, feel free to add on to that.
Can you read that comment one more time, please?
It says, any response to the idea that Alliant's announcement mentioned career assistance, but that sounds pretty meager given that the jobs lost are probably good union jobs. So just that, like, oh, great, they're going to offer career assistance and help you,
Yeah.
spiff up your resume. But, there's kind of a disparity there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think that that's kind of what I'm warning about, right? Is that we want to be careful about celebrating shutdowns, and making it seem like we're dancing, to people suffering. And also, the more we do on the front end to build out support, the more we have to talk about and be happy about at the end. But that work on the front end is key. Um, Having some sort of relationship with those unions or with those workers, um, and having a plan to support whatever is needed, even if it's just funding people's pensions fully or getting them transferred to another facility. And it's, at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's not always about the bragging. If you're able to get something like that done quietly, that's fine, because the point is helping the workers. It's not just being able to stamp and say, look what we did, right? Let's focus more on the achievement as opposed to the celebration, you know? But, oh, I'm sorry. I don't even think I answered that question specifically. I'll just say, I think, if it's going to be a week, I'm not criticizing the person who wrote that. I'm sure they did their best. And I think if it's going to be something weak, I'd rather not, personally, I'd rather not say anything about it. Meaning I would rather not mention something that's not doing much for the workers and just act like I did something major, but it's really a choice thing.
Yeah, and I think it was a piece really where it's like, this is from the perspective of the company, right? Sharing how great they are.
Right.
Okay. There are a handful of additional questions in the chat, but I wanted to pause and offer if anyone is calling in by phone or just prefers to ask your question on your microphone, please hop in before we continue. Okay, and I'll offer that up again. But then let's see, another question. Are there examples of where securitization or other savings from shutting down fossil plants have been used to substantially assist workers and communities with the transition to new family supporting jobs?
Yeah, there are a few examples of just transition funds that have been created. And I do have that in the form of a report that we created with the Illinois folks. We teamed up with the researcher out of California and try to put together some best practices and examples. If you want that, I can put that together in a package and get that provided to you. But the funding piece, frankly, is always the hardest piece, right? Because you have to convince the utility or whoever is doing the shutdown to do that. But it can't hurt to ask, and it can't hurt to, just like we build leverage for everything else, we can build a leverage for that as well. Public pressure, there's a lot that can be done.
Okay, thank you. All right. How much can or does pressure in individual communities matter in terms of providing a just transition?
I think it matters a lot. I mean, obviously some communities have more power than others, but the more they organize and the more they have us behind them and you're getting together the right people in the room, it can be really powerful.
Okay. So let's see, is the CEJA in Maryland the same as the one in Illinois? And someone maybe commented, Elizabeth Scrafford might jump in on that too.
No, it's something completely different. This FEJA is the one, FEJA is the one in Illinois. But I will also I was just thinking about that last question. I think, folks may have heard a lot about defund the police lately, and, that has had varying levels of success as of late. But there's so many groups of workers and communities who have been already organizing and have never been able to really get a lot of traction. So I don't think we always have to recreate the wheel and, start a whole new movement. It's like, look around you and figure out who are the groups who have been trying to get economic justice in their community already. And does it align with what you're trying to do? Not like trying to fit them in a box, but, is this an opportunity for you to support somebody's movement that they've already been doing? And, are there people on the ground who have been fighting for environmental justice? have they been thinking about these economic pieces? Are they folks that you could be leveraging or supporting to get a shared victory? I really want folks to start thinking like that about, teaming up with folks who are already doing this work and be supportive, and don't always have to put your flag in front. Like your flag can be in the back and it's just as fine. People will still love you at Sierra Club.
All right. And what about obstructionist unions?
Yeah, and I know someone mentioned a specific union. I just want to go back to that last point that I made about how unions are, maybe just explain this. So unions in this country are broken into national, regional, and local. And not every union has the same structure. So there's usually the international, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're literally international, but it means they're like based in DC and they're the headquarters, right? And then you often have a joint council or what's considered the regional union. And then you have a bunch of different locals that are placed in different parts of the state or the city. And so your particular local union of that particular group that you're talking about may be obstructionist, but there also might be a sister local that is actually not obstructionist, or there might be a different union in the same trade that is very helpful. The laborers as a union, we have a lot of conflict with at the national level, but some of the locals are friendly with us. Same with the utility workers and plumbers and pipe fitters. So you really never know what you're dealing with until you talk to them. And I promise I'm not gaslighting. Some unions are straight up obstructionists. But until you have the conversation with them and assess where they are, you'll never know. That's why I brought up the Blue Green Alliance as a resource, because they often know people who are friendly that you can talk to. They have a lot of unions within their ranks that can help you find the right person. And then the Labor Network for Sustainability as well. They're like grassroots organizing local unions that believe that climate change is a problem and they want to be involved and helpful in this type of stuff. So there are folks you can talk to. They may not be right down the street. They might be in your state or they might be in your region. But the idea is to connect with folks who are friendly and then have them connect you maybe with the unfriendly folks. And that intro can help you get a lot further in the conversation.
Okay, and someone just asked also if you would talk about the farm worker unions and Sierra Club.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's Sierra Club Union, I'm presuming.
Oh.
Or is that just, or the relationship between, I don't know, Carol, if you want to elaborate.
I wasn't mentioning any particular union.
Okay. Farm worker unions and the Sierra Club. I don't know a whole lot about the 20, 30, 50-year history, but I know that we have been financially supportive for some of their events in the last 10 years since 5 years since I've been at Sierra Club. I know that the farm workers union isn't as powerful as the farm workers unions are not as powerful as they used to be. Like, just keep in mind that they don't fall within the National Labor Relations Act from 1935, and they don't fall under the National Mediation Act, which is that covers all the airlines. They're in their own whole legal structure that's covered for farm workers, which hasn't been updated in forever. And so when Cesar Chavez was doing his whole movement for farm workers' rights and stuff, he didn't have a whole lot of support from traditional unions or environmental organizations. But I do think that the fight is still happening, and it's members' rights, it's immigrants, workers' rights focused now. But I don't know that we're super, super active in that, though.
Okay. Are you doing okay, Larry? We've got more questions.
Yeah, no.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Have you ever seen examples where utility companies have stepped up for their workers and joined with unions and environmental justice groups for just transitions?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't personally know of a utility stepping up to do that. I know that it's quite often for them to say, hey, we're not going to fire any of our workers. We're just going to move them to another facility. I don't think that they necessarily think a lot of that stuff is in their responsibility. The conversation we had with a utility a couple months ago, like straight up, I asked them a bunch of questions about worker transition, and they were like, "This is not our responsibility." So they can be very legalistic. They can be very like short when it comes to that type of stuff. But I do think we should be thinking creatively about what we engage them with and how we engage them. And again, just like any negotiation, it's going to be more powerful if you have people standing behind you and beside you when you do that conversation. So I think we should be thinking not just about what are they willing to do, but what do we have the power to make them do? And how can we build that power?
Okay, and someone shared that none of the solar contractors in their area are union contractors. Are there any examples of communities taking measures to build union or minority-owned contractors in clean energy where they didn't exist previously?
Oh, interesting. Well, there's a guy in Minnesota named James Staples, who created a a training facility in his community in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he recently got that thing funded. I'll see if I can find a link to that and share that as well as in the package. But he was actively trying to make sure that this place would be union. There's a line between employers and workers where employers can't compel workers to be union. So he tried to stay away from that, obviously. But what he did do was approach a lot of unions and say, like, we want to work with you. But frankly, and this is really messed up, but a lot of those unions in Minnesota, they've had a long history of exclusion and racism in their ranks. And so a lot of them, look at bringing in members from the Black community, Latino community as something that is not within their interest. And so he faced a lot of hurdles as a Black man trying to expand the craft and trade of solar, clean energy to the Black community. So I think that there's a lot of historical divisions that prevent a lot more collaboration from happening. So I say that not to discourage you from trying. I say that so that you can be aware that there's a lot of kind of stuff you have to wade through to get to what you're talking about, right? And I think that I just gave you one example of a challenging situation, but I do think that there are communities that are organizing all the time, like Art in California, who started his facility, and he's basically working with these contractors in a way that says, I'm going to give you plenty of quality workers, you just don't get to know who they are, right? So there's those examples are there if you want them, and I think we have to think about what we want our society to look like, and that's what we have to be working for.
Okay. Can you talk about the idea of retraining coal plant workers to do weatherization and energy efficiency work?
Yeah, I've heard that before. People specifically in like West Virginia, Kentucky are really skeptical of that type of stuff because you can't, I'm not downing that concept, because I think that, if people are willing and they're able to do that, that's great, right? But we've heard a lot about, coal miners can be coders and a lot of these different things. And that's not always an easy one-to-one. Like, let's realize that sometimes the idea that one job is going to be destroyed and one's going to be created is just not realistic. So there's some real challenges here. And I think in terms of weatherization and things like that, like there's plenty of opportunities that can be created by weatherization and by the energy efficiency. There was something called MUSH a while back. It was municipal university schools and hospitals that was going to be passed by the Obama administration, but that didn't end up happening. And I think that if we're talking about creating job opportunities, we had to think about them within the context of understanding the political limits of what we're trying to do. So some areas are going to be super resistant, like West Virginia, Kentucky, to any of that stuff. You're dealing with McConnell and local politicians who are not supportive of evolution of the economy. So I think that those are great concepts, but you have to have a plan to get from A to Z. How are you going to deal with those political hurdles? How are you going to get the community involved? And how are you going to put pressure in the right places when it comes to utilities and polluters to make sure that they're creating these opportunities, not just the jobs, but that the jobs are good quality jobs?
Okay, and I think I'm trying to see how this question relates. Okay, have you done a comparison of whether dollars spent on weatherization and energy efficiency might produce far more jobs and reduce more CO2 than building solar and wind plants?
So I think that some of the research that's been done, when it compares the pollution that's created by one job or another, it doesn't put them side by side in that way. It thinks about what a plant would have produced and what these new industries are going to be producing or aggregate over 5 or 10 years. So the Illinois report that we created, it thought about jobs in terms of communities that have had those what they call cumulative impacts over the last 15 or 20 years, and then what it looks like if those jobs had not been created, what will be the economic impact and the environmental impact. So I think what might be good, I don't know if you want to do a follow-up to this conversation, but I can share a copy of the Illinois report for folks to read, and then we could talk about the job creation factor. What does the pollution look like comparatively, and what are the examples for just transition? Because it seems like those are the majority of the questions that we're getting. And honestly, there's no short answer to that, but a lot of this stuff has been researched. It's already written out. So I'd love to have another conversation and talk about the specifics.
All right, thanks.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, done.
Don said the screen is not being shared. I'm not sure
Okay.
what y'all are seeing.
Can folks see Larry? As I think so. Let us know if it's showing up funny. I think those are the questions we've tracked. Are there any other questions that folks want to just hop on the microphone and ask, or drop something else in the chat? Or discussion, an idea that you want to pose? Anything? Okay. Well, I look forward to the resources that you offered, Larry. So we will give you some time to pull that together and share that out with us. But I just wanted to really thank you for your time today, and just a ton of things, I think, for us to mull through, right? And kind of bring back to our teams and our work together in our communities. So I do want to hop back out. I'm going to share my screen one more time, which I am looking for again. Oops, wrong button. Also, just to kind of preview some upcoming events for folks too, before we sign off for today. Here we go. And we can drop these links for registration pages, RSVPs, in the chat so that everyone can make sure they get the Zoom links for this. But coming up on Tuesday, the Sierra Club Wisconsin chapter is hosting a Get Out the Vote kickoff event, virtual event. So Tuesday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. So Jay Dean is going to drop that in a moment. There it is. And then on Saturday next weekend, we got more weekend plans. There is a webinar that's being hosted by the NAACP about their cold-blooded report, their clean air report. They are highlighting actually the Oak Creek and Elm Road power plants owned by Weatherization south of Milwaukee. So that's going to be very interesting, and we can drop in their Eventbrite link for you to follow that event as well, Saturday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. And then the Clean Power Coalition of Southeast Wisconsin is hosting a press event on next week, Thursday, the 29th at 10 a.m., just a brief event to highlight the anniversary of the bluff collapse 9 years ago, where the Weatherization like the coal ash and debris all flooded into Lake Michigan as a result of Weatherization operations there. So it's called All Tricks, No Treat, Weatherization Haunting Legacy in Southeast Wisconsin. That bluff collapse happened on Halloween 9 years ago. So the timing of that is relevant. So please join us for that as well. There is the event RSVP for that too. So otherwise, we will be following up with folks. I think we'll be sharing out the video from today's presentation. So watch for that, as well as the resources that Larry had offered too. And if you have thoughts, questions, ideas, you want to join an issues team, please reach out to us. Many of you know you can give us a call or email the chapter email there, which is on the screen. So yeah, just check in with us and say hi, and we hope to see you all next time at our future events. And thank you again, Larry. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you all spending time together to learn something today.